Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nate Crespo, your host for today and forever. And welcome back to another episode of the Lawyers in the Making podcast, where it is my job to focus on the unique journeys to the law and law school of professionals in the legal field and law students. And let's talk about what we're doing today. Today, we have another spectacular guest. He's a St. Louis University School of Law graduate and currently works as the founder of Lexicon Legal Content. Super duper excited to have him on the podcast today. Mr. David Arato, welcome to the podcast. How are we doing today? And I hope I said your last name right. I do that every time. Before going any further, I'd like to say a quick word about the sponsor of this podcast, Rhetoric. Back in episode 25, I had the privilege of having the CEO, Luke Yingling, on the podcast. And ever since that episode, fell in love with the product. Rhetoric takes user briefs and motions and compares them against the text of opinions written by judges to identify ways to tailor their arguments to better persuade the judges handling their cases. Rhetoric's focus on persuasion and helps users find new ways to improve their odds of success through more persuasive arguments. Know more, win more. I was able to see a demo of the product, and its cutting-edge technology and fascinating features make for a product I am proud to sponsor, and further shows the new digital era the field of law has been entering thus far on my journey doing this podcast. If you decide to book a demo, let them know Nate sent you. Be sure to check them out in the show notes below or at userhetoric.com. One word, userhetoric.com. Now, back to the show.
You did. It is Arato, and I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
No problem, David. Happy to have you here. But before we get started, can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Absolutely. As Nate said, I'm Dave Arato. I'm the founder of Lexicon Legal Content. We create optimized search engine friendly content for law firms and digital marketing agencies that have law firm clients throughout North America.
Let's go back, all the way back to the beginning. The wonderful year. Let's go all the way back to 1999. Now, this is what makes this episode so interesting because when I came across your profile, I was like, oh, this is the unique journey that I was looking for. So first, you were a section cellist. Is that how you say that?
I was a cellist, which means
okay.
I played the cello.
The section cellist for the Quad City Symphony, and then you were a cello instructor at Webster University. And at the same time you were doing that, you were at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. And then after you had graduated there, you had ended up at St. Louis University School of Law. So what I want to ask is, why did you go from cellist to then deciding to pick your stuff up and go to law school?
Well, I mean, there are a few reasons. The life of a classical musician is difficult. I got pretty tired of the audition circuit. I wasn't making a lot of headway. I was doing a lot of freelance gigging. I was teaching. And at the time, keep in mind, this is 2003, 4, law school seemed like a good fit for my personality, using the other side of my brain that I wasn't using very much as a practicing musician. And it was the path I chose to go down at that time.
So let's talk about, I always love talking about the first year. Because people love it, people hate it. Some people say it's one of their favorite years of their life. How was that first year of law school for you?
Very difficult. It was a shocking change. I was a good student in college, and I was a good student putting, if I put in the effort, if I did the reading, did the homework, showed up in class, I was able to get A's most of the time. And I brought that attitude into law school with me. And it was a shock. The amount of reading and the amount of outside work required to be competitive in your class. My first semester wasn't stellar. Now, it wasn't terrible, but I don't think I knew the rules of the game going into it. And if I could do it all over, I mean, part of the problem with law school is you're not getting feedback the way you are in your undergraduate work, right? You have a semester, then you have a final, and you get a grade. So even if you think you're doing great and you understand it, you might not be. Or alternatively, you may not know the first thing about writing a law school exam, which turned out to be my problem.
So going from that, you talk about the rules of the game that you didn't understand it. So how going forward did you break down the rules of the game and you were able to figure it out? This is the way to succeed in law school.
So where I went to school, and I'm assuming it's the same at most law schools, there's a lot of elective work you can do. So as I mentioned, you can do the reading, you show up in class, participate. That's one thing. But at least where I went as SLU, past exams were available. There were also supplemental materials that you could purchase. Uh, they were manuals. Now, again, this is 15 years ago, so I don't remember. I don't know if they're still the same. But I I would have engaged in more of that supplemental extra guidance offered that first semester. Because again, you don't know how well you're doing until you get your first round of grades back. And that first round of grades is very important when it comes to on-campus interviews, and getting job opportunities for the summer after your first year.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, even though I've never been to law school. But from talking to people, I remember Emily Logan Stedman. She was the first person I ever heard talk about past exams, that the fact that they are available. I had no idea. And
Yep.
that seemed like such an important thing to be able to have some sort of framework that you can go into the test and be able to work off of that and actually know what even is going on or what to even expect. So I think that's a wonderful point to make. And so going through law school, in your second year, you were an intern at the Missouri State Public Defender's Office, but you never eventually became an Esquire taking the bar. Now, I like to talk about on this podcast positive experiences that you have in an internship or any kind of work and some negative experiences that you've had throughout, interning and preparing to figure out what you want to do and what you don't want to do. So, can you talk about any of those experiences that you had, positive or negative?
Absolutely. So through that internship, so I went into law school generally thinking I wanted to do criminal defense, not really knowing what that meant in terms of the day-to-day work of a criminal defense attorney. That internship really opened my eyes to the realities of criminal defense work. And I quickly realized that that wasn't where I wanted to spend my career, not just with the public defenders, but more generally in criminal defense. And then I realized furthermore that the practice of law may not be a good fit for my personality, and my strengths as a professional. So I started looking into alternatives. And actually, not to correct you, I did sit for the bar. Um, but while waiting for bar results, I started doing this type of work that we do at Lexicon on a freelance basis, realized it was a really, really good fit for me and my skill set, and went straight full force into this content marketing world in legal right away after law school.
So, from that, I have to ask, based on figuring out what your strengths and weaknesses are, what are some suggestions you would have for people in order to figure out what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are?
So one thing I didn't do in law school that my wife and business partner did a great job of doing is practical skills courses. So I don't think they teach you in law school what being a lawyer is necessarily. What I mean by that is they teach you the law and they teach you how to apply the law and reason like a lawyer. But I mean the day-to-day work of an attorney, meeting with clients, writing motions, briefs, showing up in court, interacting with other attorneys. That's all, these are practical skills that most attorneys learn after law school. I think that at least where Erin, my wife, went to law school, there were tons of opportunities to be at clinics, is what they were called. And our law school experiences couldn't be any more different. Mine was all substantive bar courses and additional courses that I had interest in. She was in court, dealing with clients, doing jail visits, um, practicing law while still a law student. And that allowed her, I see in retrospect, to figure out what she was good at and what she wanted to be doing. And I think that the more practical experience you can gain in law school, the better you can determine what your strengths or weaknesses as an attorney will be moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and it's becoming almost a very common theme on this podcast, even from all the past episodes, is that truly to figure out what you do and don't want to do is you have to actually go out and experience and actually have to do it. For myself, for the very small experiences that I've had working in any kind of legal environment, I was privileged enough to work at my district attorney's office this past summer, and I was there for 3 months. Amazing attorneys, worked in an amazing department, asset forfeitures. And, I got to sit down and watch lawyers write briefs and motions and go through all this stuff and deal with all these pro se people, which I had no idea was a thing. And it's a crazy phenomenon. It blew my mind. But at the end of the summer, I had recognized, okay, it was cool. Everything was cool. I learned tremendously. I learned a lot about the law. I learned a lot about the different sectors of the law, the different functions of the law. But working at a DA's office, I'm like, I wouldn't want to do this. And
Sure.
not in a bad way, but just in a this wouldn't seem enjoying for me on a day-to-day basis.
And I think that's an important thing to realize. And I think a lot of law students realize it late in that they feel that they're stuck into a career path. And the truth is, the legal industry has so much depth to it. The practice of law is only scratching the surface of what the provision of legal services and advice is to consumers. And there are many career paths, whether that's like we're doing in marketing or in practice management software or other types of litigation support where a law degree is helpful. I think it's important for law students to not pigeonhole themselves into thinking that, well, I went to law school, I took the bar, I got my JD, got my law license, I got to go practice because there's a lot more you can do with that degree.
Now, I gotta say, David, it's music to my ears every single time I heard you say many paths, talking about the unique journeys, and that's what we talk about on this podcast. There is no straight path. There's only your own unique journey, and you yourself took a very unique journey. Now, I want to talk about your founding of Lexicon Legal Content. How did you come to this idea, being like, this is what I want to do, and actually bringing this dream into a reality? What was that process like?
Well, it's a tale as old as time, right? I fell into it, right? The opportunity presented itself. I'll tell you what, I think that it's important to recognize that there's a difference between the practice of law and communicating with clients. And the fact is that some of the best lawyers out there aren't great at communicating with non-lawyers. I actually wanted to bring this back to a conversation about writing a law school exam. Writing a law school exam is not good writing. That's not, it's like what you would, it's mechanical writing, right? And when I started doing this on a freelance basis, I realized that a lot of attorneys struggled with communicating their thoughts in a content marketing format to their potential clients because of the way they're trained, because most of their communications for the past 3 years, 5 years, 10 years has been to law professors, to judges, to other attorneys. And that isn't how you want to communicate with clients in a written medium. So doing this for extra cash, so when I say this, I mean doing legal content writing for extra cash while studying for the bar, made me realize that there was a huge market for this because every firm, every attorney that I dealt with needed these services. And I recognized that it was an unconsolidated market. There weren't a lot of people doing it. So I took the leap, formed the LLC, picked a business name, and hit the pavement, the digital pavement, so to speak.
Well, that's a beautiful story. I love hearing those things. The start of it all, the start of a beautiful thing. It's always a wonderful story. And I think what you were saying there in terms of communicating to non-lawyers, communicating to the lay person, I know many times I've spoke to lawyers, they've told me even before I started the podcast that the law is a completely different language from the English language. And a lot of the times the lawyers will get caught up in the legal language, the legalese, as they may
Yep.
call it. And I think it goes to the even deeper point of the human aspect of the law, which I tend to talk about a lot on this podcast, because you go through law school, like you said, you're writing mechanically, you're reading mechanically all day, and it's just plain text, it's facts, fact patterns to the law, and just over and over and over again, like a robot. And I think to your point, it's extremely important that consumers and people that come to lawyers for help to really solve problems, sometimes really bad problems, some are not so bad, but there's still problems that need to be solved. And the fact that you can help people communicate and be able to do that. Now, I have to ask, what advice would you give to some lawyers to be able to better communicate to that lay person what needs or wants they may need?
Well, I mean, obviously the answer is to hire us to help them do it, right? But jokes aside, it's important to keep legal jargon out of your communications. And let me clarify. What we do is we create marketing materials online for law firms. So like if you're building a law firm website, we will develop the content in such a way that makes it very highly that it will rank well for given search terms. That's the technical aspect of what we do. That being said, to directly to your question regarding how to communicate with your potential clientele, it's very important to address their pain points, right? You might be thinking about the legal aspects of a case, but I think the guy who got in the car accident and can't work isn't terribly worried about comparative negligence. That guy's worried about how he's going to pay his medical bills and who's going to cover the repairs to his car, right? Similarly, if you're talking about family law, people are worried about keeping their houses, about child custody, about what their life looks like post-divorce. Um, really addressing those pain points in an empathetic way, letting them know that you understand these are the problems that you have, and I'm going to use my legal knowledge and skills to solve them for you. But in a way that acknowledges that that's top of mind for the potential client.
So to back it up a little bit, to go back a little bit, before you even started Lexicon Legal Content, how did you find uh such things such as legal marketing, things like this? Like you said, the market was wide open. There was not many competitors in there. How did you figure yourself to find that type of market and to be able to pursue it? Because we talk about a lot of the unique journeys, and you specifically represent one. So how did you come to that conclusion that this is what I want to do?
Well, that's really, really an interesting question. Because I didn't even know this job that I've created for myself existed when I was in law school. I think I answered a Craigslist, if you can believe it, a Craigslist ad for a marketing agency looking for help with sales for website development, search engine optimization. I was terrible at the sales part of it. So they said, "Hey, Dave, do you want to try and write some content?" So that's where this whole thing started back in 2009.
I mean, that's crazy. Craigslist is crazy. Uh,
Craigslist. That just, I mean, I'm dating myself at this point. I'm showing my age that I
I mean,
responded to the
I know what
Craigslist.
Craigslist is. I know what Craigslist is. Don't worry.
Sure.
But I think that's so fascinating. I always love to ask those questions because it will help people sort of always figure out what they want to do and what they may need to do in order to be successful. And I think just as much, you were playing to your strengths. You figured out what your strengths are. But my next question I have to ask is, how did you, or let me back it up a little. I'm trying to think. I totally lost my question. I totally lost my question. I gotta be honest. I was gonna ask.
Let me add to my
You can
previous
add to it.
response. So, as your podcast is targeting people who are considering law alternative careers, I think it's really important to take that opportunity, right? Respond to that ad, even if you don't think it's a good fit, because these things happen organically. Some of our biggest clients at Lexicon are people who I've met along this journey that had I not answered that ad, I never would have met, right? And they've turned into huge business opportunities. I think it's Steve Jobs, and I'm going to paraphrase here. He said something along the lines when discussing his time founding Apple and then coming back to Apple, that as an entrepreneur, when he was in the garage, the way forward is never clear. But when you look back, it couldn't have happened any other way. And I think that speaks to the power of taking opportunities, exploring I don't know where this is going to go, but let's explore this. Let me make this connection on LinkedIn. Let me go on this podcast, right? Let me take on a small client who I don't think is going to be terribly lucrative and see what happens.
I have to say, like, I don't know if we were on the same wavelength or something, but that was my question.
Great.
In terms of the importance of being open to opportunities, open to many diverse opportunities. I love the Steve Jobs quote. I'm a big fan of Steve Jobs, one of my favorite ever.
I
Um,
hope I didn't butcher it too much.
But I think as well, something that Jonah Perlin said on the podcast that Cal Newport said, everyone's taken from everyone. That's what I do. Always quoting philosophers on here. It's fine. But something that Cal Newport says that when you look backwards on your career, it will always make sense.
Yep.
Everything, it will always make sense. But like you said, when you're looking forward based on, you don't, I mean, just from personal experience and starting this podcast, I know we just had my first sponsorship, Rhetoric, and I could have never imagined that 7 months ago when I started
Yep.
this podcast and I made the logo. I never knew that that was a possibility and all the other things that have happened. But it just shows when you're persistent, when you're consistent with things, good things always happen. What you put out there, you always get back in return. Now, Dave, we had a phone call before we even came on the podcast here today, and you told me one of the things you really wanted to talk about was AI. So, what specifically did you want to talk about AI? Because I'm very interested in AI. I've known about ChatGPT for a really long time in terms of OpenAI. Even back when Elon Musk was still a part of OpenAI, I was very aware of it. So, what piques your interest with AI?
Well, I'll tell you what. In December of 2022, I started playing around with ChatGPT and thought to myself immediately, okay, well, I'm gonna go take the Colorado bar and hang up a shingle and practice law here because we're out of business. And that sense of dread quickly turned into sensing an opportunity that AI content generation. I mean, because let me back up a little bit. Obviously, one of the things AI is really good at is creating content, at least at first blush. You play with it, you tell it did in 5 seconds what it had taken me or a team member 10, 30 minutes to do, right? Now I look at it as more of an opportunity for us to improve our processes, to improve our efficiencies, and create better content more quickly. It soon became clear to me after using it for a few months, we've built a small app on it to test it internally, that it is not capable of creating high quality content that's terribly original without significant human intervention. Because in my understanding of how it works, it's by design generic. The algorithm is by design choosing the next best word. So you're not going to get unique, compelling new content when it's pulling from a corpus of data that's existed for decades. And again, by design, it's the most generic it can be.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating point. I'm always fascinated by AI. I've been playing with ChatGPT pretty much my whole college career. Sorry,
Yep.
professor. But I think I think to your point though, it is extremely generic. That's why a lot of people get in trouble in school because they don't
Sure.
realize how awfully generic it always is going to be. Even if you frame a question, I know you could really play around. Have you played with like the framing of the questions before?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've been building, like I said, we're building a what I'm going to call a thin layer app on top of it, and then we're going to point that app at rather than GPT-4, which is what we're on now, on a finely tuned model. So I'm aware of how to get it to spit out different flavors of the same thing, but the content, as I'm sure you'll agree, is it's almost too smooth. It's too smooth. It lacks personality. It lacks individualism when it comes to phrasing and the way people speak and the way people like to write.
Yeah, I think that was always the apparent glass ceiling of
Yep.
AI
Yep.
is the fact that it doesn't have a lot of personality. There's to an extent it's very there's only so much you could do. You could do a lot. There's a lot between the floor and the glass ceiling. But I think
Absolutely.
once you hit that glass ceiling, you finally realize that in terms of like the really good writing, you're only gonna get like I love really old books. I'm a
Sure.
big fan of old books, and I know that an AI would never ever ever it could never replicate a Dostoevsky, or it could never replicate a Nietzsche or Plato. It could never, because it's entirely generic, and it's based upon all the data out there in the world.
And it's a great tool for us to have. What we use it for presently, i- content ideation. Let's say we have a client who needs 50 blog topics on personal injury. It's a great place to start, right? Or to rewrite a call to action section that we would just be rewriting manually internally. But it doesn't, and here's the interesting thing. I think that it's going to be cat and mouse moving forward here with AI generated content in Google. If you look at what they did in their last update in March of this year, the sites that got slammed were sites that were heavy AI. And Google even came up with a new term, scaled content abuse. If one day your site has 100 blogs and a week later it's got 3,000 blogs, you're not going to rank well.
That's crazy. I actually did not know that. That's
Yeah.
fascinating. I mean, I think, and I don't think I've ever said this on the podcast before, but when I first was trying to decide what the name of the podcast was, I asked ChatGPT. And it had given me, I think it wasn't exactly the lawyers in the making, but it was like legal something, like something making legal. I forget the exact wording, and then I came up with that. But I think in terms of it being a tool, I think many people are like super duper anti AI, where they're like they don't want any of it. But I think in terms of coming up with ideas and coming up with content idea, I think it's absolutely amazing for that, because you could really play around with it. You could really get depthful with it. That's not even a word.
It's a good starting point, and it's almost like bouncing ideas off of your buddy over a beer, right? Like that's the idea. Give me 10 ideas for what I should call this podcast, and then you get some ideas and you iterate and iterate and iterate and you come up with something yourself. So it's great for that. To your point regarding literature, I agree that especially not now, and I don't think in the near future, I don't think it's going to have the capability of. There will always, I'm going to talk over myself. There will always be differentiators. There will always be differentiators when it comes to any service or product that human beings are creating. So if everyone starts using AI to create SEO focused content, it's all going to be the same. So how are you going to rank above that? By adding a human element to it.
I think that's perfectly said, and I have to agree very much with that. There will always be different, because I remember one time I was talking to one of my professors. He was actually my advisor. And he was like the main AI guy in the department, and he was asking me like what I thought about ChatGPT, and that's exactly what I told him, in terms of I know all these old books that I have will be timeless and will always be read and can never be replicated, just because the bar is just too high. The bar is way too
Mhm.
high for a generic AI that just has all the data in the universe. And I think it's still, though, a wonderful, wonderful tool. I don't think people should shy away with it. I'm for AI. I'm saying it live. I'm for it.
Yeah, it's another tool in the toolbox. And frankly, in the content creation space professionally, we've been using Grammarly as a first round of grammar and check for the content we're developing for our clients for years. And Grammarly is, in fact, AI. A lot of people don't know this. It is using an AI algorithm. It's not generative AI. Well, it is. It actually has a feature now, but we've been using it for years. To be anti-AI at this point is denying what's going to be happening. It's a tool that all of us are going to be using. But I think that the initial fear of it taking everyone's job was a little unfounded.
I
But
think
maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm out of it. Who knows?
well, time will tell now. We
That's
could
right.
come back
That's
to
right.
we come back to this episode 5 years ago, 5 years from now, and be like, ah, dang it, maybe we
Yeah,
didn't get that one right. But it's out of my hands now. But
that's right.
speaking of Grammarly, speaking of ChatGPT, I love. There's a new question, but I love talking about the new era, because I feel like the legal industry as a whole is now on the precipice of something new. We talk about AI, we talk about digital marketing, we talk about all these different things that are now entering the legal field. And the legal field is very traditional. there's a lot of old people, no offense to those people, but it's a very traditional industry, and it seems like everyone is moving in this sort of direction where technology is becoming more prevalent. It's becoming more used in law firms. Digital marketing, just like yourself, is being used more by lawyers across the country. So I have to ask, what is your current, they like to call it a tech stack, but what is your current tech stack look like? Are you using any products besides ChatGPT and Grammarly, which I love? I've been using it since like eighth grade. But are there any other products that you see out there that you love very much and you see as aspiring?
So keep in mind that we're not in the practice of law. We service law firms and agencies that work with law firms. So I'm not going to be able to speak to practice management software like Clio. Our tech stack is so we're a fully remote team, always have been pre-COVID, always fully dispersed. Our tech stack has been Slack, Basecamp, Trello, Grammarly, Salesforce we're using. Just we have a stack of SaaS products that we use to accomplish the tasks that need to be accomplished in the day-to-day course of the business.
I love Slack. Slack's one of my favorite and Grammarly. But the Slack founder, he has one of the best articles ever. It's we don't make saddles, we sell horseback riding. It is one of the best articles I've ever read in my life. I think it was a message out to the entire company. It's very sales based and very startup entrepreneurial sort of based. But if I had a recommendation of an article, I'd start there. That's like I read that like every month, once a month. I always make sure to. It's fascinating. But moving on, fourth to last question, because tech stack's the fifth last question. Now we're on to the fourth question. But live on the Lawyers in the Making podcast, what is Dave Arato's book recommendations? Doesn't have to be about the legal industry, doesn't have to be about the law, just some of your favorite books that you ever read, something you give, like a couple books you'd give as a gift to someone.
Oh man, you blindside me with this one. So right now on my nightstand is Tools of the Titans. It's Tim Ferriss. It's just short little profiles on high performers, whether that's high performers in sports or business, investing. And I think that pick that one up and pick a random profile and read it regularly for inspiration, to keep in mind what's important, to learn from others who've achieved things, great things, who've built businesses. That's a good one. I just recently gave away a copy of What Do We Know Anyway? I think that's the title of it. It's a good way to stay focused and centered and stay focused on what's important.
Absolutely. I know that all this morning I came back to my car from class, had a parking ticket. Had to get all stoic and be like, it's
Yeah.
not that big a deal. It's just $30. I get over it one day. Second to last question here though, Dave. What does an ideal Friday night or Sunday morning look for Dave?
Mm. Well, let's do the Sunday morning because I'm getting a little old. I don't go out much Friday night. So as we discussed, I live in the mountains in Colorado. I'll tell you what, I like getting up, making myself a cappuccino, and if it's ski season, getting out like maybe first or second chair as soon as I can get out there, getting a few runs in, getting home by lunch, and then just enjoying the rest of the afternoon. If it's not ski season, swap out the mountain bike for the skis.
That's fantastic. I've actually never been skiing in my entire life. My dad worked in the Poconos for like
Okay.
a couple of years. Never, no one ever took me. No one ever thought. No, I mean, yeah, they did never. They didn't actually take me. I hope to ski one day though, because it seems like a lot
I'll
of
tell
fun.
you what, I didn't start till I was well into my 30s, and I would call myself a competent skier at this point. It's never too late.
Okay. There's no time like the present. I love that kind of attitude, and I hold it myself. So I got to get on the slopes one of these days. But last question, Dave. I do this at the end of every episode. What are your words of wisdom for the aspiring law students, the current law students, the current legal professionals, and pretty much anyone else out there?
I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. I do not pigeonhole yourself into a particular career path. whether regardless of where you are in your professional development, but I think it's particularly important for law students. If you go online and read about the value of a JD, there's people who say it's the best thing they've ever done. There are people who say it's the worst thing they've ever done. They hate the practice of law. They have $100,000 in debt and they can't do anything else. It is truly a versatile degree. Maybe not in the versatile degrees, not in the sense that it'll get you hired, but the JD teaches you how to think. It allows you to view situations critically and is a great starting point for an entrepreneurial journey. If nothing else, you don't have to have someone else go over your contracts for you, right?
Listen, you always got to be weary of cutting that overhead as much as you possibly can. But Dave, that's all we got. That's the podcast. So thank you so much for coming on here, spreading your wisdom, spreading your experience, and even in your words of wisdom, further spreading that message that there is no one straight path. Don't pigeonhole yourself. There's so many different paths you could go down, so many unique ways that you could find yourself going into the future. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. But for everyone out there listening, check us out, lawyersinthemaking.substack.com. One word, lawyersinthemaking.substack.com. And I will see you in the next one.